Welcome to All Villa, No Filler, a podcast all about Aston Villa, the world's greatest football team. Remember to subscribe to All Villa, No Filler. Now, Aston Villa have lost two major players in Tyrone Mings and Emi Buendia to injury. As of recording, they're also close to signing Nicolò Zaniolo from Galatasaray on loan. To find out how Villa can cope without Mings and to also find out a little bit more about Zaniolo, I'm joined by Daniel Pritchard. He was recently on the show and the episode was so popular, he's joining me again. Dan's a data specialist who covers football tactics and he's an avid Aston Villa fan. Dan, welcome back to All Villa, No Filler.
Thank you for having me back. I'm glad it went down well with everyone, and I wasn't adding any filler to this All Villa podcast.
Believe me, we say there's no filler, but I think we do a lot of filler on our regular shows as well. And trying to distract from having to talk about losing 5-1. But look, so first off, look, I think the big story this week, obviously, is Tyrone Mings' injury is a massive blow to Aston Villa, really, on the surface of it. We haven't played well without Mings for pretty much ever since he joined the club. Do you think that Mings' injury was the catalyst for the second half collapse at Newcastle?
Yeah, like it was an absolute horror show, particularly that second half. But I think it was a major factor. There's a couple of other things that were plaguing us before. I think the Buendia injury likely changed what the plan would have been. We had to bring in Bailey with Diaby, and from the off, really, I felt that we weren't putting enough pressure on the ball when we've also got the high line. It's something that Liverpool struggled with last season when they couldn't get their press right. If you give the opposition too much time on the ball, finding those balls behind the lines becomes so much easier, and then you're running with your back to goal. And in the end of it, even in the first half, where even after Mings' injury, I felt we were quite competitive. Newcastle still created, three pretty big chances, and they were clinical with those on the day. You wouldn't expect that. Let's say even when you kind of make those mistakes, you won't necessarily expect them to score two of those three big chances, but they do. That happens, and we got one back. I felt we looked competitive. Some of the interplay was quite nice, and had Mings not gone off, I felt like potentially I could have changed things up in the second half, and we could have maybe even played for a draw or ended up taking home three points. Mings did get injured, and it was difficult to watch for someone who's put basically along with McGinn, and there's been plenty of people along the way, but he's helped put this club in Europe from almost non-existing as a club. So if anyone deserved to play there, it was him, and it was so gutting. And I do think that had a psychological effect on the players. Not only were you missing your, one of your leaders, your really a defensive organizer, is just such a big personality. So I felt we held things together till the third goal, and then the collapse after that point felt inevitable without Mings' organisation. You've also by this point you've also taken off McGinn, and I felt that was a mistake. You lose a lot of energy, and also I felt he's stepped up as a leader, and that helped contribute a bit. By the end, with the subs, without the organisation of Mings, it all just felt like a big mess. You didn't know where anyone was, and Newcastle could just walk through and take their pick of passes and shots, really.
Now, obviously Mings going off, as you say, it took the wind out of my sails watching it as a fan. That seems to be, what a lot of people have said. And also, I can't help but think the players were impacted by it as well. They just had to be. But Mings isn't going to be here now. It could well be the entire season, which is just so gutting to think of. But now that Mings is out, who starts?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I would have been pondering that all week. I imagine he's got a plan by now. But part of the reason I think Mings is such a big loss outside of what I've already mentioned, the leadership, the organization that he brings. He's a really useful defender to build your defense around. There's a kind of a theory in tactics circles that a centre back pairing is best when you have one cat and one dog, and in up, the cat being a slightly more sly character who track back, win the ball quite cleanly. You kind of Rio Ferdinand and Nicolò Zaniolo are your best examples of that. One of them going out, being aggressive, getting the ball, the other one being a bit more slight. And Mings could almost do a bit of both when he played. He most often played with Konza and was the more aggressive partner of the two. But he also had a very good ability to track back to get these kind of last ditch blocks in, make a clean tackle. And that's before you get into his aerial ability. He's always the first to put his head on it. So, those are big things that you've got to replace. And as for who takes his place, I think now more than ever, Konza really has to step up. I didn't think he was going to be dropped anyway, particularly after the end of last season. But he's been under Unai for a year. I seem to remember he captained a few of his youth sides. He's an intelligent defender, and I think between him and Martinez, they really need to now step up as leaders and say, we're going to take charge now. We're going to organise things. With Mings being left-footed, Torres is the obvious input there. He's quite a different defender. We're going to have to find ways to mitigate that and reassess what we're doing in the back line. But Torres is someone as well that has experience in a Unai Emery side in a very similar system to the one we're playing now, and someone else that without Mings there, he's only just arrived at the club, but all of a sudden he's got to be asked to step up as well.
And so if Pau Torres is to start on kind of as the left centre back, what's the best way to complement him, do you think?
So I think what will happen we'll probably see some different combinations over the next few weeks. I think we're unlikely to see the Pau Torres at left back design that we were seeing in preseason with Mings. Just because he caught a lot of flack against Newcastle, and I don't think it's necessarily unfair, but Cash just isn't as doesn't quite have the technical level of Digne, for example, even though Digne struggles to get up and down unlike Cash. But you kind of saw against Newcastle, I remember at least one big chance, and I think we can all name a time where Matty Cash, because of his physicality, he can get in the right areas, but when it comes to executing in these areas, he can leave something to be desired. So I think now we'll look at Pau Torres as the starting left centre back. It's the position he's most comfortable in, and we need to get the players cut in the back line as comfortable as possible, as quickly as possible in the league. And in pre-season we saw a lot of Pau Torres in some kind of back three when we were in possession. I don't think that was by accident. I think we talked. Last time I was on, we talked about how Pau isn't necessarily is someone you bring on for his progressive abilities and not necessarily the strongest centre back. And you're going to have to put. I think Unai will want to put two other traditional centre backs in there, be that Konza as the right back or Chambers with Konza in the middle. We're not sure how Diego Carlos is doing in terms of his injury, but as I allude to earlier, you're losing a lot of aerial prowess with Mings, and at least before his injury, Carlos was really you know, while I wouldn't call him an out-and-out aerially dominant centre back, he was certainly the best of the bunch in our current crop.
Okay, because you've kindly produced some graphics for us explaining some of the aerial dominance of our defenders. So I'm just going to bring that up now. This is the aerial dominance that we can see on display here. We're losing a lot with Mings going, aren't we?
Yeah, and just to kind of go into the numbers a little bit for the audio listeners, it's basically just this simple bar chart is just showing that Mings is winning over the last three seasons almost 70% of his aerial duels. Every 10 crosses that come in near Mings, he's winning 7 of them, and that's really good, especially in the Premier League where you can come across quite physical attackers, and teams. A lot of teams do like to flood the box. This is up against you're not playing against these players week in week out, but this will be against Haaland, who I felt Mings did very well against players like Mitrovic, and there's really quite the drop off when you look at our other centre backs, particularly Chambers, who is barely winning over 50% of his duels. Konsa fares a little bit better, so you're somewhere around the 60% mark, the mid 50s. Top Torres in a similar place, although did quite poorly last year, only winning like around 55% of his duels. Mm-hmm. And as I said, Carlos is, at least before his injury, was probably the closest you get to Mings. He won just over 65% of his aerial duels in the season before making the move to Villa, and then obviously got that big ACL injury. So that it does remain to be seen now whether he has the that explosiveness in his legs to be able to get up there and challenge the ball. But I think we're going to have to find ways of coping with Mings's loss in the air, be that through the transfer market or as I said, you can use that back three in possession, and I would expect three of Torres, Konsa, Carlos, or Chambers to be set up quite narrow, or three of them in the box for crosses. And you kind of, with the three of them in the box, you expect one of them to kind of get their head on the ball in play most of the time. But when you're up against, like I said, your Haalands or defensive set pieces, that could be a real concern if we don't look at the transfer market, in my opinion.
When it comes to the defenders that we do currently have, who is your favoured back line then?
If everyone's fit in 100%, I actually quite liked how we set up against Lazio, with Carlos actually taking the central centre back role with Konsa, nominally a right back but more of a right centre back, and Pau on the left. That I think is a setup that plays your strongest aerial centre back with two of your more, and this is not to put Chambers down, but two of your more technically gifted centre backs. And while people have dug out Konsa for his playing the ball, how he plays the ball out the back sometimes, and I think that's fair enough. He's such a good defender when it comes to tracking back and finding the danger before it happens, that now without Mings, he's undroppable, really. And we saw in preseason that this kind of setup actually gave him the space and time to try and find those progressive passes, especially into the dual tens that Emery likes to play, and with the with Kamara and Louise kind of coming quite narrow to drag opposition defenders out the way and open those passing lanes for him. But the question mark is, how ready is Carlos? Is he going to be able to play? If you don't bring anyone in, you're asking him to play a lot of minutes coming back from an ACL at 30, 31. It's not an easy thing to do for a young player, let alone one who's kind of been around the block a little bit.
And if Villa did dip into the transfer market, when you look across the back four, which particular part of the back four and which attribute would you like to see Villa target?
For me, I think you've got two options really. I think when you're assessing the back line as it is now, we've just dropped a significant amount of money for a centre back on Pau Torres, and you should really be, both because of his ability to play out the back, but he's familiar with Emery's systems beforehand. You really have to be looking at him as your starting centre back. Just because of the outlay you've dropped on him first and foremost, but so if you're looking at Pau Torres as your long-term left centre back, rather than trying to find a like-for-like replacement for Mings, someone left-footed who has those leadership qualities, the aerial dominance we've already talked about, you might actually want to find someone right-footed who'd be able to play with Torres, even if you have a flat back four like the one we saw against Newcastle with more traditional fullbacks. And in that search, you'd want someone who completes Pau Torres a little bit. You want someone who's going to be aggressive in getting at the ball, who's nonetheless difficult to dribble past, who's able to be commanding in the air, and something that's maybe a little bit underrated, especially when you see some fans on social media going, "Oh, we should go in for Maguire." I think you need someone who's mobile when you've got Pau Torres. Pau Torres isn't quickest, isn't able to turn the quickest. It almost moves a bit similarly to Harry Maguire, actually. And if we do want to play this high line, which Emery seems to want to do, to put a lot of pressure onto the ball, you're going to need someone who's quick with their feet, has a lot of recovery pace, and the ball playing really here is a bit of a plus point. You can maybe get away with, because Pau Torres is so good, you can maybe get away with having someone who's not quite as strong in that area. But that's really what you'd want to look for if you're looking to find someone to succeed Mings, and you're not convinced that partner long term is Konsa. The other option, and the one I kind of prefer a little bit, is the fact that we kind of need to find a right back anyway. We want to find, particularly when he's fit, Moreno adds just so much threat down the left-hand side. He can cut inside and actually form part of that box midfield that we like to make him in build-up. He can cross, and when you get down into these possession value models, looking at Villa since he joined, Moreno just adds so much value whenever he's on the ball. You really want to find a way to fit him in, and so, like I said, that usually means Pau Torres as your left centre back. I've talked about how I think Konsa is going to be pretty invaluable with his experience, how he knows the team, his we hope he kind of steps up, organising the rest of the defence. But right back is an area that we need to look at anyway. It's since we lost Ashley Young, who was technically a depth fullback, but getting a little on the older side. Whereas you got Cash, who's very physically able, but maybe is lacking a bit technically and doesn't quite offer those centre back qualities that you want when making a back three. So I think with regards to the right back, you will actually, rather than looking at the right back, look for a centre back with some right back qualities, so similar to what Emery did with Juan Foyth at Villarreal, because that in that narrow back three, you're gonna need someone, especially in the Premier League, who's just going to be able to put their head on it. I think a lot of sides will target our left-hand side, knowing that we prefer to build up there, that Moreno is going to be up the pitch, that Pau Torres is a little bit weaker defensively, is going to be dribble past a little bit easier. So I think we're going to be fielding a lot of crosses and cutbacks from our left-hand side, and therefore you kind of want someone with the qualities that I already mentioned in a Pau Torres partner, but maybe there you're looking for a bit more technical ability on the ball to be able to fulfill those right back responsibilities and defend the wide areas.
I'd have to totally agree with that. I think it's the right hand side, isn't it, that looks to at the moment that needs some real improvement, really. But you've picked out some specific players. You mentioned Juan Foyth. Is there what is it about Juan Foyth you like, and also are there any other players as well in particular that you have in mind?
Yeah, there is absolute.
And here we go. Here are the players in question.
Yep. So you can see there the first player I've put underneath is Juan Foyth. Now that he's not anywhere near. This is just looking at his area ability, and he's not touching Mings in terms of his aerial ability. But for someone who is nominally a right back, that's really, really quite good. He's winning pretty consistently 60% of his aerial duels. You put him with, a capable aerial threat in Konza, and you can be reasonably sure you're going to get heads on the ball most times. The balls goes in. But I think the reason we've been linked so heavily is it's quite an easy link to make. He's played for Emery at Villarreal. We have a role for him here with that right centre back, right back role that he knows quite well. And despite Pep Guardiola kind of doing the whole inverted fullback thing all the way back in, I think, like 2016 at Bayern Munich, it's still that kind of right centre back kind of also going into the midfield double pivot is still not that common a profile to find in football. And Foyth can do that job really, really well. Actually, there's another slide after this one that demonstrates that for a right back, and Foyth is incredibly difficult to dribble past.
Amazing, yeah. Look at that.
Like really, 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 really good. And you see the last three seasons there. He's you can see that when he was playing perhaps a more traditional right back sort of role, he's getting dribbled past maybe about almost up to 60, slightly less than 60% of the time. But you go into 2021, 22, and last season, and that jumps up massively. He is he's and anyone who tries to dribble past him, he's tackling them, almost 75% of the time, certainly over 70% of the time, and that's a real asset to have when you have someone who's also going to be defending the wide areas and stopping any danger from coming down that side. And that's before you start adding on his technicality on the ball, what he would add to playing in the back. And I think, if this were in any way a cheap transfer, it would be an absolute no-brainer. But we've seen reports that Barcelona were looking at him, and that Villarreal, after losing Torres, don't really want to sell. He's not cheap. I think his release clause goes, I'm not sure what it's at now, but it will go up in a few weeks to 54 million euros or around this mark. And I think because that's just not a price I think Villa can touch without concerns about FFP and how much you're spending there. So I think you have to look elsewhere in the market, despite him being a really good option. So I've actually picked out a few others. So we've already been linked with Tyler Adams, who most people will recognize a bit more as a defensive midfielder, but he has played that right back role before, and I think given the quality we have in the midfield already, having someone who's a mobile tackler who can potentially do that job of inverting and maybe freeing up Douglas Luiz to go and be progressive, to get a bit more involved in the attack, could be quite a valuable asset. He joined Leeds last year, and for me was one of their stand-up players. He is difficult to dribble past for a midfielder. Certainly, tackling about 65% of his people that try to get past him. And if we go back to his aerial ability, again, it's not unfavorable in this area. He's winning more than Juan Foyth, for example, despite only being about 5'10", 5'11". I think he seems to have quite a good leap on him. His last year in the Bundesliga, he was winning more, 66% of his aerial duels. Last year in the Premier League, he's still winning, over 60% of them. That's someone you can look at who has just a 20 million release clause that we know about now, and there's the injury concern. We went for Jack Harrison seemingly this week and backed out because of injuries. But really, I think we need to look at tying this position down long term. And if there's a few weeks where, okay, this player isn't about, we can make do. We have good defenders. It's just something you don't want long term. But looking a bit more at that, potentially players that could fulfill what I called, option 2, eventually, someone playing alongside Pau Torres as your main centre back. I've actually picked out two players that I really liked the look of from the data. One of those being Konstantios Mavropanos, and I'm sorry to any Greek listeners or people who speak Greek. But so he actually originally caught my eye, not through the data, but in person. I live in the lower Rhine region of Germany, so I get to see a lot of Borussia Mönchengladbach. I live in that area. And Mavropanos is someone who actually crossed over with Emery whilst playing at Arsenal. He was mostly there, from 2008, mostly being kind of like loaned out. And one of those places was to Stuttgart, where they eventually signed him for about 3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I think Transfermarkt had his market value at 15. So Stuttgart felt pretty clever about that. I think they got promoted to the Bundesliga, but have been a pretty bad team. I would say a pretty bad team since then. They got into the relegate in Germany. The relegation playoff is between the third from bottom of the Bundesliga and the third place team in the Zweite Bundesliga, and scraped through that game against HSV Hamburg. But I went to go see Stuttgart play Mönchengladbach, and it was a dull as dishwater game. Stuttgart were a bad side, and Gladbach under Daniel Farke were pretty boring. It was a lot. I think people are quite familiar with Farke ball, and if you're playing that in Germany with players that are more used to a high intensity pressing style, it can get pretty turgid quite quickly. But there were a couple of players that stood out really on the Stuttgart side, and those were Sousa, who I was a left back that I think we were linked with back when we were under Gerrard, and Mavropanos. And once you kind of get into the data, and the people on YouTube will be able to see this on their screens, but he's a bit of an aerial monster. His his off seasons are still winning over 70% of his duels. He's winning around the same amount as Tyrone Mings on the seasons where he's not doing quite as well. And there's always a bit of fluctuation in his numbers season to season, but he's winning anywhere between 70 and 77% of his aerial duels. Is a big guy. He's a very aggressive centre back. Makes a lot of tackles, a lot of interceptions, and even for a bad side that defend quite a bit, is doing that quite a bit. He gets very, very involved with build up. He's a player who will would have to scale things back a little bit under Emery. He's really given license to dribble up the pitch and to pass out and to try and and even to try and break into the box on occasions. And the reason I picked this guy out is for those qualities that would make him, I think, a good partner to Pau Torres, but also for the moment where I think Konsa is going to be quite vital. He's actually played quite a bit as the right centre back of a free edge Stuttgart. He's played as a right sided centre back in the two as well, and even done a few games at right back. But those kind of qualities where he runs up the pitch, he puts in a decent number of crosses for someone who's normally a centre back. Those are the kind of technical qualities you'd like to look at if you're looking at a centre back who maybe can do it at right back and defend those wide areas, which I've certainly seen him do. And if you go and look at the YouTube highlight reels, you see plenty of that for Stuttgart. Potentially the issue with that or any signing we're going for at the moment is that big old UEFA homegrown rule that that we're staring down the barrel of if you're bringing in, even though he played at Arsenal, he moved there when he was 19, and I don't think he would count as far as I'm aware of the rules. So I've also picked out another player here who is Premier League experience with Fulham, and that's Tosin Adarabioyo, who started out in Man City's academy, so he's someone who has a lot of technical quality. He's not as aggressive as Mavropanos, but what he does make up for is that very Premier League experience. Is very cool and collected on the ball. He's very mobile. He's still good in the air. He's still winning, just under 70% of his aerial duels there. Again, for Fulham finished well last season, but I wouldn't go ahead and say they were a great side. They still had to defend a lot. And if we have a look at his kind of percentage of tacklers dribbled, he's really made quite a massive improvement over his 3 years. So he signed for Fulham, I believe, in 2020, and Fulham as a whole struggled that season, but Adarabioyo, in particular, he won. Well, he was getting dribbled past over half the time when he was when someone was coming at him, and it's not a brilliant trait to have when you're a centre back, but goes to the championship for a year, builds his game, brings those numbers up. He's tackling over 65% of those that would challenge him, and then making the step up to the Premier League this year. He's improved on those championship numbers. He's just under 70% of dribblers tackled, and there's a lot of noise when you're looking at statistics for centre backs. It's a position where you want to. There's a lack of something happening is kind of really what you want. Everyone kind of knows that famous Maldini quote. So it's a really difficult position to scout for just using the event data, numbers of tackles, number of interceptions. You're only really telling what sort of style centre back they are. But I would say a pretty key aspect of being a centre back at this level of the Premier League is being someone who's difficult to dribble past, and Adarabioyo certainly covers that. Then you add to that, he's actually played quite a few games at right back. He played quite a few. He spent some time with West Bromwich Albion, where he played something like 15 to 20 games as a right back, and that's far more than say Mavropanos. It's far more than Adams. And if you're looking for someone that's homegrown, has a year left on his contract, I think Adarabioyo could be a really smart buy.
Those are sort of the defensive options that you've targeted. I like the sound of pretty much all of them, and hopefully some of the Villa team are watching. I don't know, but
if they are, they can give me a call. Call, and I'm open to work.
Yeah, so am I if you need it. But I mean, one player Villa have or are on the cusp of signing. He's got the Fabrizio Romano "Here we go" tagline. Zaniolo on loan from Galatasaray, more famous probably for being with Roma, where he was signed by Monchi. What do you think about this signing?
I think last time I was on, I described our signings thus far in the window as quite measured, quite sensible, and I think Zaniolo is maybe a slight step away from that. I think been quite well publicized on Villa social media at this point that he's had two ACL injuries. Had a bit of a drop off at Roma before going to Galatasaray and kind of rebuilding himself a little bit. So there's certainly a lot more risk involved in this transfer. But I think the club seem to have done a pretty good job of mitigating that. It's at that time of recording, we don't know whether it's an obligation to buy after 20 games, whether it's just an option to buy. But any of those last two would seem like a pretty sensible way of mitigating that kind of risk you have of bringing in someone who's maybe had a patchy couple of years and has had a couple of big injuries. So, on the whole, I'm not someone who felt we massively needed another attacker in, but especially like to replace Wendia. But because he's quite a versatile player from what I've seen, and I have to caveat everything I say with I've kind of looked into the data for the last few seasons. I've tried to watch clips on YouTube like everyone does. Try to watch them all games, but I can't claim to be an absolute expert on this guy. But it seems he's quite a versatile player. He's played as a second striker on the right wing, and I think with Bendigo, it just eases that pressure a little bit on McGinn, who you probably is going to be starting every game now. I think he's played some games as a striker, and that eases the pressure a little bit on Watkins, and on someone like Diaby too, who's you're looking at as that player who's going to be in the right half space, looking to be between the lines. Zaniolo, it seems to be quite a similar player in that regard, and might free up Diaby to say go out onto that left wing that we're currently having a bit of a crisis in terms of injuries for. And when it comes to looking at the data, and some of the clips, what you can see is a player that seems to be quite good in tight spaces. He is seems more of a carrier. He has a lot of take-ons and wins them a lot of the time, which is something Emery's really looked to add in to the attacking line. It seems with both Diaby and Zaniolo, and that really suits a player who's going to try and potentially pick up the ball from a progressive pass from the centre backs or the defensive midfielders, and then drive and be direct at goal. Something else he adds is shots, and we talked last time about how last season we were very reliant on Ollie Watkins for a lot of our shots, a lot of our shooting output, and between Diaby and Zaniolo, that you're getting, in Zaniolo, you've got a player that in Serie A was taking about three shots per game, which is generally considered to be quite a good number of shots for a forward player. It's going to just lessen that need that Watkins always be the guy to run the goal, to take the chance. But with that, there's some caveats. If you just look at last season or even the last two seasons, it would look like we've got another player with pretty low defensive numbers, much like Diaby, and you start having that concern again, like we had against Newcastle, where you play Diaby and Bailey, and you're just getting enough pressure on the ball, particularly to play the high line, and that's a concern with Zaniolo. He's had 2 ACL injuries. I don't think he's going to be a pressing monster. But if you go far enough back in the data, particularly to before Mourinho joined Roma, but after he'd recovered from the ACL injury, you actually find he made quite a good number of tackles in the middle and final thirds, and that's potentially something Emery will look to develop a bit more in his game. Where, again, we talked last time that Emery is a bit of a practical and defensive coach. And when you've got a coach like that, you can, when you're a recruitment department, you can kind of almost overlook the defensive side just that little bit, knowing that you have someone who's very good at coaching that side in people. And similarly, from his numbers, he has a very low number of passes. He's seemingly not playing in teammates all that often, and I think that's something Villa will want to develop in him. And at 24, I think that there is still quite a bit of time to get him up to speed there with a more possession style. I don't think Monchi would bring a player in that Emery wouldn't be able to play Emery defensive possession football if he needed to. And I think there are certainly a bunch of risks with this transfer that are somewhat mitigated by the nature of how we're getting the player in. But if we can, if Emery can set him down, get him coached in his style, potentially with the rewards for getting this guy in could be really, really high. And I think it's a risk worth taking at the moment.
Okay, yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. He sort of seems like the kind of Emery player who in the past, hasn't necessarily lived up to full potential, has for various reasons. And, in the past, Emery has worked with players like that and, really brought them to heights that I think people maybe forgot that they could get to or didn't believe they could reach. And so I'm cautiously optimistic on it. Excited to see what happens with him, and I think, as you say, like as a loan, I think it's probably a risk worth taking, and just adding a bit of versatility and competition up in the attacking areas. But Daniel, it's been absolutely brilliant to chat to you again. Really enjoyed that. Found out a lot about various players I didn't know, and I think come to understand more about where the strengths and weaknesses might now be in Villa's defence particularly. But Daniel, for those who want to hear more from you or read more from you, where can they find your work?
Thank you very much for having me on again. I've really enjoyed the couple of times I've been on. So anyone can find me most of the time on Twitter. It's at 1874 Pritch, where you'll find whatever I do, when any writing or this podcast when it comes out. Otherwise, I've actually launched a Substack which will start becoming a bit more active soon, called W Methodology. And for those who are a bit more into the data and analysis side of the game, it's really aiming to go behind some of my written works and exploring a bit more detail the processes that go into football analysis, some of the mistakes, the thoughts you go in with are quite often not the thoughts you end up with when you drill down into it, and it really looks to delve into that part of football analysis.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds great, and I look forward to checking that. And I strongly recommend everybody listening to this and watching should do the same. But Daniel, once again, thank you very much for coming on.